Kingdom succession comes via consulting the king. Church leaders have the responsibility of identifying and training the next generation of leaders. This pattern is found throughout the Bible. Joshua was being trained and mentored by Moses for a long time. When Moses meant to meet God in Mount Sinai to receive the law, Joshua went with him further than all the other elders. And we read that previously, so I won't read it again. Although Moses had trained and mentored Joshua, when God told Moses he was going to die, Moses asked God for a successor. Let me emphasize this. Moses was with Joshua for a long time. Moses didn't just say, well, Joshua has been next to me from the beginning, so I guess he's the guy. Moses asked God for a successor. Our leaders should be asking God for a successor. Too many people dying and leaving the church in disorder because they never asked God for a successor. It needs to stop. After Moses asked God who would be his successor, God told him it would be Joshua. God commanded Moses to take Joshua before the priest and the congregation and lay hands on him to give him charge and commission him in front of the people. This is how it's supposed to happen. The pastor shouldn't just die and then the whole church is just in confusion. The whole church should know, okay, this particular leader, these leaders are on their way out. These are the next people coming up, and they should sanctify them in front of the people. Here's how it happened. Numbers 27:23. And he laid his hands upon him and gave him a charge as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. God reveals his wisdom in causing succession to happen this way. It says Numbers 27:20, and thou shalt put some of thine honor upon him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. In order that the next generation of people didn't just lose their mind and say, you know what, Moses is the man, we're not dealing with anybody else. God made sure that Moses laid his hands upon him, sanctified him in front of the people. He said, put some of your honor upon him, that the children of Israel will be obedient. Look how God, secured the transition from Moses to Joshua. There is no success without a successor. And when we do it God's way, good things can happen, because guess what? They got into the promised land. This is the model that we should be following. Shouldn't just have a generation of leaders dying and there's no one to take their place. What do you mean? What Bible are you reading? That's not the model. And this is why I'm saying we have to be mature, because like I said, I want to reiterate, this is not for you to turn around now and disrespect your leaders and da-da-da-da. But at the end of the day, they need to do what's right. And you have a right to go to them and say, this is what the Bible said. Now, what happens after that? I don't know. But you have a right to show them the word. They are not God kings. They are your brothers and they are your sisters. You owe it to them to tell them the truth. Because I'm telling you this, lying to your pastor and not being honest to your pastor is not helping him. That's not being a good brother. It's not being a good sister to allow your pastor to do nonsense and you don't tell him that's nonsense. Wonderful. Pastor said recently that he has a mandate from God in which he has 3 years left to raise up people in different ministries and positions. Yeah, I thank God for that. And I love that man of God because he's very humble. So I would expect that from him. Elizabeth Mackenzie, Sister Beulah, go ahead. You had your hands up.
Praise the Lord, everyone. So can you hear me? I'm out at the moment.
Yes, go ahead.
You can hear me. Okay. I think just to add to a bit to what you said, that the culture of a place or the general kind of mindset of a place is very important in developing the next leaders. So you can want it, but if the culture of the place or the how things are, it will not give birth to that. 100%. So if you want it, but there isn't, let's say, discipleship and everything is hinged on the Sunday service and there's no kind of in and out of each other's houses and lives, and just general fellowship and different ministries that it won't happen. So I think it's a few levels deeper as well.
Yeah.
You can want it, you can pray for it, but it's just, if the culture, if things are not, like it has to be sewn into the way things are done in your particular ministry or assembly or whatever, and then it's more likely that will happen. I know people I think use Moses incorrectly. He was the one solo man. Only Moses went up to the mountain. Only Moses did this and that thing. But there was something about Moses's, there was, I don't know, delegation. There was sharing. He must have had times when he was sharing, and whoever wanted to be part of that sharing, or that part of the delegate, they sat, and Joshua was part of that.
Well, remember,
and so that's why it was easier for him to come out, I guess.
Remember, Moses' father-in-law came to him because he was tired, and he said, "You can't do this by yourself."
And told him, yes.
And then he said, "You need to find some people." And Moses said, "I wish all of you lot would prophesy." And Moses put his spirit on all these other men. So Moses was not working on it. And the thing is, to use Moses as a direct example is incorrect anyway, because the Bible says that there was a grace upon his life that it wasn't upon anybody else, right? Number one. And Moses is not an example for the church. It's the principle that we take. We don't take the exact direct example. So for anyone to try to take Moses and directly compare, no, what I'm using here is the principle of successorship, because yes, as you said, Moses didn't even work by himself. Even though he was the main leader, that was the way God had it in that season. But actually, we can see in the New Testament that God has given us a completely different example, but we know God doesn't change. So the principle that Moses, that we see here, we can take. So 100%, the culture of the church determines how these things happen, as you were saying. But this is why I've started with leadership, because if the culture of leadership ain't correct, the whole body's going to be messed up. So this idea of one man at the top in a pyramid, it has to go, because it does not facilitate the gifts and the callings and the priesthood of all believers being matured and being discipled. It doesn't facilitate that. Because it often is the case, not always, that if the pastor is one way, if you don't come in his image, you are not going to be nurtured. This is why I say a lot of prophetic people get run out of churches, because the pastor is not very prophetic. And when they come up with all their prophecy and stuff like that, now no one knows how to manage them. Then what happens? The prophetic voice in that church gets silenced. Then what happens? That church dies slowly. Then what happens? Because there's no prophetic voice outside of the leadership or outside of a certain generation, all the young people leave. So one way to know your church is dying and pretty much dead is when there's no prophetic voice outside of a certain group of people. There must be a prophetic voice in every generation, because the death of the prophetic voice probably says Jezebel is there, but it's also saying that your church is dying a slow death, because eventually all the young people are going to leave, because someone needs to speak to them from their generation. So this is why we need to get the leadership right, because what flows from the head will go into the body. And if the head is sick, then the whole body is sick. This has to not be continued in our generation. I won't be a part of it. We're finished, but, well, I'm just going to finish off this section because we're over time. Paul mentors Timothy. We need, for succession to happen, and I believe this is what you was actually talking about, Sister Beulah, we need succession and mentoring. This has to be a part of the culture. Paul's relationship with Timothy is a beautiful example of the servant leadership of Christ, in the same way Christ was patiently guiding those 12 men. Paul encourages Timothy to make full use of the grace of God on his life. We all know these scriptures. Yeah, look at the way Paul is talking to him, my dearly beloved son. Let no man despise thy youth, but be an example. Be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. Neglect not the gift that is in thee, Like, this is the kind of relationship that has to flow from the leadership to the next generations, to everyone in the church, not just the Timothys, everybody, whether you have a speaking ministry or whether you don't, whether you're the next great evangelist or whether you're not, whether you're the pastor or whether you're just the, someone with a gift. I don't want to say just, whether you just have a gift of help, whether you have a gift of administration, whether you have the gift of tongues, whether you have the gift of healing, whether you are a teacher. Everybody needs this kind of mentorship and relationship. Sister Catherine, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that if there isn't somebody with your kind of calling, then you might have to find mentorship outside, because the body is a big body, isn't it? So
and that's the kingdom
assembly.
right there. That is exactly, that's a wonderful example. If someone, because not every church has everything, if you can't grow in your own church, you should be allowed to go with the blessing of your leaders to another church where you can get specific or better mentoring than you can get in your own church, because there might not be someone who can help you in your own church. That's not a problem. That's okay. It's okay. It's not an issue, because remember, you don't belong to the pastor. So he should be like, do you know what? In fact, he should be coming to you and saying, do you know what, sister? You've got a deep prophetic gift. And yeah, people prophesy in this church, but there's not really someone mature enough who I believe can take you on the journey you need to go to. I'm going to send you to this church for 6 months to a year, right? And let's see what God does. If God wants you to stay there, that's fine. But you know what? That church probably has enough prophetic gifts. So after you finish, come back and let's see what you can do here. Maybe you now can be mentor to someone else. This is the way we should be operating. But we just want to heap up everyone to ourselves and have 5-10 people on the platform who can preach and tear down tear down everyone, but you don't want to send none of them to another church down the road. This is not what God intended. We have perpetuated some garbage. It needs to stop. Equipping and sending, in the same way Jesus equipped the disciples and sent them to do the work, Paul encourages and equips Timothy for the work of the ministry, reminding him to not neglect the gift that was given him via the Spirit of God and the laying on of hands. Yeah, prophecy and then the confirmation of the elders. In the book of Titus, Paul charges him to set things in order in Crete and ordain pastors in every city. Succession planning and equipping was very much a part of Paul's ministry. Okay. We are going to continue this next week.